Standing in the fire, screaming, I am the truth. Let's go. Welcome to my makeshift kingdom. Welcome to my makeshift kingdom. Everything that was.
Alright everyone, here are my views on racism and bigotry. Now, racism is a lie built upon a lie. Human beings are not different races. We are not even as different breeds of dog, which are one race. The only difference between human beings is, of course, the melatonin in the skin and facial bone structure. But that does not constitute another race. The fear that human beings have, some human beings have, many human beings have, is that someone else who looks different is different. That they constitute a foreign threat that we have to consider. This is what has driven the idea of racism. This is what has driven racism. The funny thing is, despite race not really existing, there is racism. Because those who are racist imagine that just because somebody looks differently, that they are different and they constitute a threat worth evaluating, worth fearing, and they wish to be around people who only look like them. This has been a problem throughout human history. Sometimes it's bigotry, not having tolerance for a person who has different viewpoints on either the gods, God, or culture or tradition. And also, a lot of the time, it's pure racism. Not being able to distinguish the difference between somebody who is actually different and somebody who just looks different. But even if somebody is actually different, even if they have completely different viewpoints, even if they have a completely different understanding and style of life than you, that does not constitute another race. So we, as human beings, are all one. There is no division between us, yet we fight over the shades of skin color, or at least many people do. Now, let me share a few stories with you from my own personal life that will show how racism happens, how it exists in the United States of America. Now, I live in Texas, but, back when I was a teenager, I wasn't a very good person. This was over 7 years ago. I'm 27 now, but even towards the end of my teen years, I was a much better person, but let's say it was, a decade ago. A decade ago, I was arrested a few times with my friends, and my friends were of either mixed so-called race, but really mixed ethnicity, and I am, of course, white, a fourth Mexican. Now, the cops that arrested us would always treat me differently, and even as a bad person, this drove me insane. It drove me crazy that I was being treated better than my friends who were not, mostly white. So when we were arrested, my cuffs would always be looser. My treatment was always better. My friend, even when we got to, this is before we were 18, so we were sent to kid jail before we were bailed out. I was sitting in these cubicle-like rooms with a glass front. I was given my hoodie because it was cold. I was given extra clothing, and it was a black guy that actually gave it to me. But my friend, who was of mixed race, was not given extra clothing, was not given his hoodie, because I guess he looked scarier. But for some reason, I was given something to warm myself. And this always puzzled me, but not necessarily puzzled, but vexed me, like, why was I treated better? And at the time I knew, and even now I know, is because I was white. I am white. And there are other instances. For instance, police stations will look into crimes committed against white people far more thoroughly than they will people who have crimes committed against them who are not white. I can list the death of one of my best friends in high school. His death was not looked into thoroughly. It was kind of brushed off because it was an overdose. But as far as who sold him the drug and who was there and who allowed it to happen, it was all brushed off. As a human being, we have to start to realize that no matter where we are as far as how society treats us at large, there are certain prejudices against other human beings who look different. Now, I'm a mostly white man in the United States of America, so I am treated very well most of the time. I mean, I got into a wreck recently in which it was a pretty bad accident, but the police treated me very well. They didn't shine a light in my face. They didn't thoroughly question me and berate me or anything like that. And the other guy that was in the accident sped off almost immediately. Now this could be due to him speeding off almost immediately, but I could have gotten multiple tickets, but I didn't. And I was treated very fairly, and the police engaged me with small talk. This has always been something in my mind that I would not have been treated differently. In all the times that I've dealt with police, if I would be treated differently if I wasn't white. And this drove me crazy even when I wasn't a good person, even when I didn't try to be a good person. I used to berate police with, insults and things like that when I was a teenager, but nothing came of it because they thought, oh, okay, you're just having a bad day. In fact, one police officer, when I was a teenager, said, I don't know if you're just having a bad day or what, but just don't do this again. Whereas if I was a different so-called race, which is really ethnicity, I'm sure that I would have gotten a whole different treatment because I've seen it happen before. Now, why does it seem in the world at large that white people control so much? White men, particularly. There are a couple different theories that I want to go over, and one of them is that because Northern Europe was so cold, you had to develop the skill and the technology in order to warm yourself and keep your family safe. So that increases technology in a way, but that does not look at, like the Eskimos. They find ways to survive, and they didn't advance in technology, so this doesn't make complete sense. But what it comes down to, another theory, and I don't know if it's true, but it's fairly plausible, is that since white people were, Northern Europe were herders. They even had their cows and sheep often sleep in their houses when it was too cold. That we built up a resistance to diseases because we were so close to livestock. And all these diseases, everyone who didn't build up an immunity just died. And then eventually we just the ones who were left built up an immunity to certain diseases from, the filth that livestock bring with them. And then once white people kind of expanded and moved out of Europe, we had these resistances to diseases that other people did not have because we lived literally with our livestock. And basically, for instance, when we came to America, the Native Americans did not have the immunities to the diseases that our bodies basically still carry. So it was very easy to conquer in America, white people conquering, because all we had to do is have a little bit of contact, and plagues would spread throughout Native American populations because they did not have, while we carried the pathogens, they did not have the resistance to the pathogens that we did. These two theories are incredibly sad, really. And, the second one, I think, is more plausible. But no ethnicity is inherently better. It's all about conditioning. It's all about societal values in terms of even valuing beauty. When there is a certain dominant ethnicity, the value of beauty becomes the values that dominant ethnicity becomes. That is why even people who talk about, what a trustworthy face looks like in regards to studies, or what traditional beauty is like in similar studies, we find that people with white, narrow faces with small noses and just smaller features in general tend to be more trustworthy in regards to polling and experimenting on people when it comes to trying to figure out what people trust more or what people find more beautiful. And it's an absolutely terrible state of affairs that we find ourselves in, but it's one that we find ourselves in regardless. Race does not exist, and throughout my life, I have been around more people of color than I have white people, I guess you could say. And in my heart, I never really had any hatred for somebody who looked different than me because of this. Of course, if I was just raised around other white people and those white people were very racist, maybe I'd end up differently. Maybe I would believe differently. But my parents were not racist at all. I mean, even if they were racist, even a little bit, they didn't say it or they didn't transfer it to me. So I grew up in a multicultural community, and my parents weren't racist, so I just never really became racist, in my own opinion. Now, I'm viewing myself through the filter of myself, so that is something that must be taken with a grain of salt. But I think that we start to realize other people are really people like us the more interaction we have with them. The more we realize, okay, they're just like us. They have the same problems. Their parents may have the same fights. Their community has the same concerns. And after desegregation, I think that we started to realize that more and more. And white people started to realize that more and more, because being segregated from another community is because they look differently. Having the water fountains say one for colored and one for white, that creates a lack of understanding because we don't have contact with the people who are obviously now just like us. They just look a little different. That's it. Bigotry is the intolerance of somebody else's viewpoints, and bigotry and racism are brothers. Bigotry, now if I was to examine somebody else's viewpoint and they look different than me, or they believe so different from me that their ideology was repugnant, then there will be some level of bigotry, unless we are just completely open to the ideas of others, which is not true most of the time. But racism is built on an illusion, and bigotry is built on an illusion that our ideas are supreme. Whereas if we start to diagnose our own mental psychology and start to try to put a label on it, we can see that there's always a need to expand our understanding. And if you don't do that, then you will become a bigot. You will continue to be a bigot. Or you will be a racist and continue to be a racist. So my view on racism and bigotry is that it is ignorance, pure and simple. It is an unwillingness either to recognize the facts or simply not having them to begin with. And ignorance spreads like wildfire. You can spread it to other people, but since we have such a great, social network now online, we communicate with other people, we view information about other cultures, other kinds of people, we exchange music, we exchange culture in a way that we never have before. Bigotry and racism has become harder, thank God, because as the generations progress, when we start to accept in this generation that these things are just the ignorance of the past, we will find that our children increasingly become less racist, become less bigoted, and we slowly start to come together as a united humanity into a oneness we never have experienced before in recorded history. So hey, thank you very much for watching. I hope this has been interesting. This has been my views on racism and bigotry. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, shoot it down in the comment section below on YouTube. If you want to follow my channel, please subscribe. I will be producing more videos like this, and I have plenty of spiritual videos and videos on mental illness. So hey, I hope all of you have a great day, and remain understanding.